Welcome back to Panacea9 podcast, where we uncover the voices and visions that shape our world. Today, I'd like to shine a light on those who are often overlooked. You know, the ones who we call unsung heroes. Those whose legacies changed the course of history, even though they may not be household names every day. These are people who challenged systems, invented new paths, and lifted others while staying somewhat far from the spotlight. In a world obsessed with celebrity, it's easy to forget that quiet revolutionaries always have and continue to walk amongst us. Today we celebrate some of these legacy makers, and in their stories, you might just discover the hero in yourself. Most of us know the name Rosa Parks. In fact, I talked about her in an earlier episode. Remember? The woman who sat down and in doing so stood up for justice. But what if I told you there was someone before her? Someone younger, someone bolder, someone history nearly forgot. Her name was Claudette Colvin. Claudette was just 15 years old. She had spent the day learning about Black history in school, about a woman named Harriet Tubman and another one, Sojourner Truth. Women who resisted, women who fought back. And later that same day, when a bus driver ordered her to give up her seat for a white passenger, she said no. She wouldn't move. She didn't move. She was arrested, handcuffed, and thrown in jail, charged with disturbing the peace and assaulting a police officer. But let's be clear. Her real offense was having the audacity to resist in a world that demanded her silence. So why don't we know her name? Because the civil rights leaders at the time didn't think she was the right face for the movement. She was too young, too poor, too dark-skinned, not polished enough, not safe enough. But Claudette was enough. In fact, she was one of the original plaintiffs in Broder versus Gale, the court case that officially ended bus segregation in Montgomery. Her stand-up sitting down came 9 months before Rosa Parks. She lit the spark before the cameras ever showed up. Her courage helped pave the road to change. And yet, her name is still catching up to her legacy. So today, let's say it out loud. Claudette Colvin, a teenage girl who rewrote history, but still hasn't been given her own chapter. Let's say her name. Because history isn't complete until all voices are heard. During World War II, in the shadows of one of history's darkest chapters, a quiet hero emerged. No, not a soldier, not a politician, just a social worker, armed only with courage, compassion, and unshakable moral compass. Her name was Irina Sandler. Inside the barbed wire confines of the Warsaw Ghetto, children were starving. Families were being torn apart. And Irina, only 29 years old, refused to look away. She became part of the Polish underground And she began smuggling Jewish children out one by one in an ambulance, in suitcases, in toolboxes, and even in coffins. She rescued over 2,500 children, each one a life saved from certain death. But she didn't stop there. Irina carefully recorded every child's real name, written by hand, and sealed those names in glass jars. She buried them in her garden, hoping, praying that one day after the war, she could reunite those children with their family. And many of those families were never found. Eventually, the Gestapo caught her. She was tortured. Her legs and feet were broken. She was sentenced to death. But our beautiful Irina escaped. The resistance helped her slip away, and she continued her work in secret. She didn't seek fame. She didn't expect praise. And for decades, the world barely knew her name. It wasn't until the late 1990s when a group of high school students in Kansas stumbled upon her story for a history project that the world finally began to understand the scale of her bravery. Irina Sandler saved generations. She's known to have said she wished she could have done more. Let that sink in. She saved 2,500 lives and still wished she could have done more. That is the weight of conscience. That is the mark of a hero. Today we say her name, Irina Sandler, because the world needs to remember what one person's quiet courage can do. You've probably heard of NASA, rocket launches, moon landing, the iconic image of astronauts floating in zero gravity. But behind the scenes, back in the early 60s, far from the spotlight, there was a woman, an unknown woman, whose math helped launch America into space and bring it home safely. And all of this still in a brutal time for Black America, and women for that matter, at a time when even white women were rarely more than secretaries. This woman's name was Katherine Johnson. She was a mathematician, a human computer. She worked in a segregated wing of NASA where the bathrooms, the coffee pots, waste baskets, and even job titles were separate. And yet her mind soared far beyond the boundaries society tried to place on her. Katherine calculated orbital trajectories, equations so complex most couldn't even read them, let alone solve them. Her work was essential to the Mercury missions and absolutely critical to Apollo 11, the mission that landed humans on the moon. And when it was time to launch astronaut John Glenn into space, he made one specific request: get the girl to check the numbers. He wouldn't strap in the rocket until Katherine Johnson personally verified the flight. That's how much trust he had in her precision and her brilliance. Her mind became the measure of safety. But for decades, her name wasn't in the headlines. Her story wasn't in the textbooks until a book and later a film called Hidden Figures, finally brought her genius into light. And when the world saw her at last, they saw not just a mathematician, but a woman who broke barriers without breaking strides. A quiet but well-spoken force, a scientific trailblazer and national treasure. Katherine Johnson didn't just help launch rockets. She launched a new era, one where brilliance could no longer be hidden by bias, your gender, or the color of your skin. Her story reminds us history isn't just about what we remember, but who we choose to remember. And Katherine, she deserves to be remembered. In a world obsessed with fame, wealth, and recognition, there once lived a simple man in Pakistan who asked for none of it. No spotlight, no luxury, no glory. Just one van and a heart big enough to carry a nation's pain. His name was Abdus-Sattar Edhi. He had little formal education, no government support, but he made it his mission to serve humanity no matter what. It began with that single van which he had. He drove it himself, day and night, picking up the sick, the abandoned, the forgotten. But over time, that single act of compassion grew into something extraordinary in nature. A volunteer-based ambulance service. A foundation laid by Edhi became the largest volunteer ambulance network in the world. But it didn't stop there. It built orphanages, clinics, women's shelters, homes for the mentally ill, burial services for the unclaimed, all offered freely with no judgment to anyone in need, Muslim, Hindu, Christian, rich or poor. It didn't matter. To Edhi, suffering had no religion. He lived in a tiny apartment above the clinic. He wore simple clothes. He refused to accept money for himself, even as millions flowed through his foundation to save others. He once said, "No religion is higher than humanity." And he lived that truth every single day. When Abdus-Sattar passed away in 2016, he was mourned as Pakistan's greatest humanitarian, a man who served without fanfare and loved without limits. And yet, outside of South Asia, his name is barely known. But it should be. Because in a world that often feels too divided, too self-centered, too hardened, Satar reminds us of something profoundly simple, that greatness isn't in what you own, it's in what you give. Back in 1946, in a small movie theater in Nova Scotia, Canada, a Black businesswoman walked into a theater to see a film. She bought her ticket, took a seat in the main floor section, and refused to move. Her name was Viola Desmond. What happened next was not a misunderstanding. It was an enforcement of something quiet but cruel, written into policies, not laws. She was dragged from her seat, fined, and imprisoned overnight. All because she sat where only white patrons were allowed to sit. Her act of defiance came 9 years before Rosa Parks made history on a Montgomery bus. But in Canada, Viola's name is still too often unknown. Even in classrooms, even in conversations about justice. Yet her courage lit a spark, one that fueled Canada's civil rights movement, one that demanded questions long buried in silence. She was a trailblazer, an entrepreneur, a woman who simply said, "No, this is not right." And for decades, that bravery was overlooked. But in 2018, long after her death, Canada finally did something it had never done before. It put a woman, a Black woman, Viola Desmond, on the face of the $10 bill. Not a politician, not royalty, but a woman who challenged injustice when one quiet act of resistance. Still, many Canadians don't know her name. History, though, isn't just about what's written. It's about what's remembered, what's lifted, what's passed on. So today we remember her. We say her name, Viola Desmond, not just a face on a bill, but a force that helped change a nation. These were the legacy makers, ordinary people in extraordinary moments. They weren't chasing history. They were answering their conscience. And in doing so, they changed the course of it. They remind us that the world doesn't shift only through power of politics. It shifts through courage, through compassion, through people who refuse to look away. So the question isn't whether you'll be famous. The question is, will you be brave? Will you act when it matters, even if no one's watching? Because that one moment, that one decision might echo longer than you'll ever know. You don't have to have a spotlight to shine. You don't need permission to lead. You just need to care enough to act. That's how ripples become waves. That's how memory becomes legacy. That's how you become part of the story. If this episode moved you, tell someone about one of these unsung heroes. Keep their stories alive. And maybe, just maybe, start writing your own. Thank you for listening to Panacea9. I'm Gloria Y, and I see you next time. Be well. From scattered fragments to global unity, healing our world together. Today's episode is all about arts as revolution. It's often art that helps us piece things back together in moments of silence, injustice, or despair. Art paints what words can't always say. It sings what hearts are too heavy to voice. It builds bridges where language and politics fall short. Art has always been more than decoration. Art is declaration. It's resistance and it's rebirth. From murals on crumbling walls to poems whispered in protest, to a dance that tells a story too sacred for speech. Art remembers what history often forgets. Art doesn't just reflect the world, it goes further and reshapes it. It reveals truths, it heals trauma, it connects us across borders.